it is fair to say things won't go back to truly normal until we have a vaccine that we've gotten out to basically the entire world.
Let's talk now about where our world appears to be headed, a world of mandates. This year we've had forced lockdowns, which we now know were completely unjustified based on discredited data models from Neil Ferguson of Imperial College London. In fact, the coding that made the predictions has been described as unreliable and a buggy mess, and yet the lockdown has been retroactively justified in the interests of public safety. We've seen the forced closure of businesses, tens of millions of people worldwide made unemployed, masks now being made mandatory on public transport or for entry into shops in some countries, mandatory testing, and increasing suggestions that vaccination will also be mandatory. I've previously mentioned this article from themetro.co.uk. Matt Hancock hints coronavirus vaccine could be compulsory. The Health Secretary has said he hopes everyone in the country would be immunised against coronavirus if the UK develops a vaccine. Matt Hancock stopped short of confirming jab would be mandatory when asked at today's Downing Street press conference, but he didn't rule it out either. A working vaccination is yet to be developed anywhere in the world, but scientists at Oxford University and Imperial College London are locked in a race to make one. Yeah, I really trust that last company there. Speaking to reporters, the Health Secretary said, "The question of whether it's mandatory is not one that we've addressed yet. We are still some time off a vaccine being available. But I would hope, given the scale of this crisis and given the overwhelming need for us to get through this and to get the country back on its feet, the very positive impact that a vaccine would have, that everybody would have the vaccine." Yes, the idea of getting back to normal life will likely be sold to people with getting the vaccine, right? They'll associate those two things together. The controlled economic collapse that we're living through, which is being blamed on the virus, well, they'll claim that in order to return the economy and public life to normal, that the vaccine will be this wonderful cure-all. But of course, it's just snake oil. And just like how the media sneakily moved the goalposts from "we need to lock down till we flatten the curve," and then it was "we need to lock down till we get a vaccine," they'll likely just say that people who don't get the vaccine will simply lose more and more of whatever dwindling freedoms they have left at this point. National Coordinator of the UK's testing effort, Professor John Newton, said mandatory vaccinations are an option, but that hopefully it won't come to that, suggesting it could come to that. He added, the most successful vaccine programs tend to be via consent. So what really matters is clear explanation of the benefits and any risks associated with the vaccine, and a really good system to make the vaccine available to anybody who needs it. Although some countries have adopted mandatory programs, the most successful programs tend to be on the basis of consent, good information, and good delivery mechanisms. But clearly, mandation is there and can be used in some instances. In the United States, lawyer Alan Dershowitz has previously said the following.
Let me put it very clearly. You have no constitutional right to endanger the public and spread a disease, even if you disagree. You have no right not to be vaccinated. You have no right not to wear a mask. You have no right to open up your business.
Wait, can I stop you? No right not to be vaccinated? Meaning if they decide you have to be vaccinated, we have to be vaccinated?
Absolutely. And if you refuse to be vaccinated, the state has the power to literally take you to a doctor's office and plunge a needle into your arm. If the vaccination
Where is that in the Constitution?
If the vaccination is designed to prevent the spreading disease. If the vaccination is only to prevent a disease that you will get, for example, if there's a disease that will kill you, you have the right to refuse that, but you have no right to refuse to be vaccinated against a contagious disease. Public health, the police power of the Constitution, gives the state the power to compel that.
The following article is from offguardian.org. Colorado adopts mandatory vaccinations for children. Since the arrival of the coronavirus, the use of and familiarity with vaccines has dramatically increased, prompting a more aware and questioning public, With little more than a 48-hour public notice, many Coloradans were enjoying a brilliant Sunday afternoon as the state Senate Health and Insurance Committee was squirreled away in the confines of the state capitol to approve the School Entry Immunization Act, also known as SB 20-163. While a Sunday afternoon may not seem an appropriate time for a legislative body to accept witness testimony or to conduct its legislative business unless there is a clear intent to limit public participation, that kind of strategy has a way of boomeranging with the loss of public trust and confidence. Yet the Democrats had an intense legislative urge to codify SB 163 with as little public input as possible. The Dems control both houses of the General Assembly as well as the governor's mansion, thereby controlling the state's entire legislative agenda. What the Democrats were not counting on was Robert F. Kennedy Jr. on his way to becoming a national icon, who arrived to testify against SB 136. He was allotted 2 minutes to address the committee. What else the Dems were not counting on was a last-minute rally attended by 3,000 outside the Capitol that Sunday afternoon. Kennedy quoted one of the Democratic members of the committee who told the media, "If we can't get a vaccination bill passed during a pandemic, then we'll never get it passed." Speaking to the throng, Kennedy went on to call out the Democrats. "I am a lifelong Democrat. What they are doing here today is antithetical to every value that the Democratic Party has expressed in its 200-year history. Adoption of SB 163 was accomplished on a party line vote, beginning with committee approval and through the Senate and House votes to adoption. During House consideration, a bipartisan amendment was added to allow for a voter referendum in the 2022 election, but the majority of the conference committee removed that language. In addition, much of the state's mainstream media provided minimal reporting on the Dems slipping SB 163 through on a Sunday afternoon. Kennedy's appearance before the committee or the size of the last-minute rally. As its name applies, SB 163 mandates immunizations for all children entering Colorado public schools, thereby taking the decision out of the parents' hands and requiring a doctor to certify approval. The fact that the bill contains elements akin to Orwell's 1984 Big Brother regime is disturbing. SB 163 requires the state's educational system to aid and abet in the monitoring of its students, as it requires each public school to collect each proof of immunization and each exemption request that is filed. Each school must also establish a tracking system and provide an annual report on that school's rate of immunizations and the number of exemptions issued. Such bureaucraties indicates, rather than a parental responsibility, each child's vaccination will be tracked by the school district throughout that child's history as a student. Of special interest, SB 163 indicates there is an onerous submission process for those wishing to claim a non-medical exemption, such as a religious belief whose teachings are opposed to immunizations or a personal belief opposed to immunizations. Those individuals must submit a certificate that their chosen religion has adopted a policy regarding vaccinations and a certificate that they have completed an online educational module, which you can expect to be little more than a one-sided harangue on the virtues of vaccinations. As I've said many times, it's likely that much of the requirement for vaccines in this brave new abnormal world we're moving towards will be enforced at the level of things like entry into public spaces or private businesses, and of course usage of public transport in the same way that masks are becoming mandatory on public transport right now. I predict insurance companies claiming that they can't insure a business like a pub or a restaurant if the owner can't guarantee that all customers are vaccinated. Proof of immunization will be required. Anyway, back to the Off-Guardian article about mandatory vaccinations for children. As adopted, SB 163 is compatible with another totalitarian-oriented legislation introduced by congressional Democrats as H.R. 6666. Oh boy, was that number really necessary? The TRACE Act, testing, reaching, and contacting everyone. The TRACE Act will establish a nationwide vaccine monitoring system with a force of vaccine tracking agents. Much of the American public remains unaware that frequently used synthetic materials such as mercury, aluminium, MSG, formaldehyde, polysorbate 80, and glyphosate are routinely inserted among other ingredients, which RFK Jr. identifies as neurotoxins, carcinogens, or related to autoimmune disease. Also, before anyone says it, for the 8 trillionth time, I am not anti-vax. I am pro-safe vaccines. And I'm definitely against the mandating of vaccines that are not required. I especially want to know what's in the vaccine. And I'm definitely against a vaccine that's been rushed to market without sufficient safety testing. I've also previously gone through the following BBC article. Will travel be safer by 2022? Travellers would present the customs officers with an entrance visa and vaccination record. That could be a paper card or a tiny tattoo on their arm, invisible to the naked eye, but readable by an infrared scanner. This technology already exists and has been tried on live animals and human cadaver skin, said researcher Anna Jaklenek at Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Their method uses microneedle patches that can deliver both the vaccine and a squirt of invisible ink under the person's skin, storing the vaccination record. You know, this reminds me of something I once heard Bill Gates say in an interview.
Eventually, what we'll have to have is certificates of who's a recovered person, who's a vaccinated person, because you don't want people moving around the world. So eventually there will be sort of this digital immunity proof that will help facilitate the global reopening up.
Wow. This is already starting to sound familiar, isn't it? Let's see where this BBC article goes to next. It says the macroneedles don't leave scars and are less invasive than the regular needles. It's like putting on a Band-Aid, Jaklenek said. That subdermal record is readable by a simple scanner, she added. It can even be done with a modified phone. Supported by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the technology was aimed to help in the developing world where paper or electronic records aren't always reliable. The goal is to try it on humans with a measles vaccine soon, but the tech may come handy for other proofs of immunizations, for example, at the immigration point. And there you have it, folks. What to me sounds like the mark of the beast. So what are your thoughts on this? As I've said before, vaccines will likely be made mandatory in the same way that masks are becoming mandatory for going on public transport, entering certain shops and businesses, etc. Look, I wish I was wrong about this stuff. I really want to be wrong about this stuff. But, I mean, the predictions that myself and others have been making over the past 3 months are starting to appear in mainstream news articles like the BBC. On the 26th of June, the New England Journal of Medicine published the following article, Ensuring Uptake of Vaccines Against SARS-CoV-2. As COVID-19 continues to exact a heavy toll, development of a vaccine appears the most promising means of restoring normalcy to civil life. What was it that Bill Gates once said?
There's a lot of dialogue between our foundation experts and the government now, but what does opening up look like? Which activities like schools, have such benefit and can be done in a way that the risk of transmission is very low.
Yeah.
And which activities like mass gatherings may be, in a certain sense, more optional. And so until you're widely vaccinated, those may not come back at all. It is fair to say things won't go back to truly normal until we have a vaccine that we've gotten out to basically the entire world. And so the best people at the foundation who are all about high volume vaccines, are working with many manufacturers, not only on the safety and efficacy, but getting that billions of dose capacity. And so like China, there'll be a partial opening up, which some jobs will resume, school will resume, but we'll have to be very, very careful not to have the rebound until the vaccine comes.
Perhaps no scientific breakthrough is more eagerly anticipated, but bringing a vaccine to market is only half the challenge. Also critical is ensuring a high enough vaccination rate to achieve herd immunity. Herd immunity can of course be achieved through widespread exposure, as was done in Sweden, but as Dr. Marcus de Bruin has pointed out, the purpose of the strategy that most places have taken, social distancing, lockdown and masks, has been about limiting natural human exposure to the virus and preventing development of our own human immune systems in order to lead us down the path of the vaccine and making the vaccine the only permitted solution. One option for increasing vaccine uptake is to require it. Again, one option for increasing vaccine uptake is to require it. Mandatory vaccination has proven effective in ensuring high school children immunization rates in many high-income countries. However, except for influenza vaccination of healthcare workers, mandates have not been widely used for adults. Although a vaccine remains months to years away, developing a policy strategy to ensure uptake takes time. We offer a framework that states can apply now to help ensure uptake of the vaccine when it becomes available, including consideration of when a mandate might become appropriate. Our approach is guided by lessons from US experiences with vaccines from the 1976 swine flu, H1N1 influenza, smallpox, and human papillomavirus. We believe that 6 substantive criteria should be met before a state imposes a SARS-CoV-2 vaccine mandate. The first is the existence of evidence that COVID-19 is inadequately controlled in the state by other measures such as testing, contact tracing, and isolation and quarantine, as indicated by sustained troubling trends in cases, hospitalizations, or deaths. As we know now, new deaths from COVID-19 are rare. What we're seeing at the moment is increased numbers of cases due to testing for coronavirus antibodies. Increased testing is happening right now. So the common cold can be a coronavirus, and if someone's had a cold in the past, which is everybody, well, they can find those antibodies, and that's put down as a COVID case. It makes it an easy way to manufacture a spike in cases. Principles of public health law and ethics require that interventions that impinge on autonomy be reasonable and necessary. Therefore, COVID-19 must present an ongoing threat. So that's people's bodily autonomy gone based on fatality statistics presented in the mainstream media that we're just supposed to simply accept without question. By the time a vaccine is available, more will be known about natural immunity in the population, the consequences of relaxing community mitigation measures, and the feasibility of scaling up test and trace strategies. There should be a reasonable indication as to whether further measures are needed. Although state vaccination mandates are usually tied to school and daycare entry, that approach is not appropriate for SARS-CoV-2 because children won't be a high priority group. In addition, state mandates should not be structured as compulsory vaccination, absolute requirements. Instead, non-compliance should incur a penalty. This is very important. Nevertheless, because of the infectiousness and dangerousness of the virus, relatively substantive penalties could be justified, including employment suspension or stay-at-home orders for persons in designated high-priority groups who refuse vaccination. Neither fines nor criminal penalties should be used, however. Fines disadvantage the poor, and criminal penalties invite legal challenges on procedural due process grounds. Both are bad public health policy for a COVID-19 vaccine because they may stoke distrust without improving uptake. Well, to me, those kinds of measures are simply too extreme and authoritarian on the face of it, and they would create backlash. I'd say it's because it would just red pill too many people in the general public to the reality that this entire manufactured crisis has been about injecting the entire human race with Lord only knows what, and that's the reason why the populace is being scared into compliance by a big scary pandemic. By the way, I found this piece of legislation from Florida, the 2019 Florida Statutes, Title 29, Public Health, Chapter 381, Public Health General Provisions. B. Public health advisory means any warning or report giving information to the public about a potential public health threat. Before issuing any public health advisory, the state health officer must consult with the state or local agency regarding areas of responsibility which may be affected by such advisory. Upon determining that issue, a public health advisory is necessary to protect the public health and safety, and prior to issuing the advisory, the state health officer must notify each county health department within the area which is affected by the advisory of the state health officer's intent to issue the advisory. The state health officer is authorized to take any action appropriate to enforce any public health advisory. Public health emergency means any occurrence or threat thereof, whether natural or man-made, which results or may result in substantial injury or harm to the public health from infectious disease, chemical agents, nuclear agents, biological toxins, or situations involving mass casualties or natural disasters. Before declaring a public health emergency, the state health officer shall, to the extent possible, consult with the governor and shall notify the chief of domestic security. The declaration of a public health emergency shall continue until the state health officer finds that the threat or danger has been dealt with to the extent that the emergency conditions no longer exist and he or she terminates the declaration. However, a declaration of a public health emergency may not continue for longer than 60 days unless the governor concurs in the renewal of the declaration. The state health officer, upon declaration of a public health emergency, may take actions that are necessary to protect the public health. Such actions include, but are not limited to, and going down to number 4, it says, ordering an individual to be examined, tested, vaccinated, treated, isolated, or quarantined for communicable diseases that have significant morbidity or mortality and present a severe danger to public health. Individuals who are unable or unwilling to be examined, tested, vaccinated, or treated for reasons of health, religion, or conscience may be subjected to isolation or quarantine. A. Examination, testing, vaccination, or treatment may be performed by any qualified person authorized by the state health officer. B. If the individual poses a danger to the public health, the state health officer may subject the individual to isolation or quarantine. If there is no practical method to isolate or quarantine the individual, and this is important, the state health officer may use any means necessary to vaccinate or treat the individual. Finally, I found this article on law.com. State Bar Group calls for mandatory COVID-19 vaccinations, regardless of objections. Some Americans may push back on COVID-19 vaccination for religious, philosophical, or personal reasons, says the report released on Thursday by the NYSBA, but it says, for the sake of public health, mandatory vaccinations for COVID-19 should be required in the United States as soon as it is available. Citing a robust collection of federal and state case law, a New York State Bar Association task force group on Thursday said it should be mandatory for all Americans to have a COVID-19 vaccination when one is available, including those who don't want it for religious, philosophical, or personal reasons. The one and only exception, says the Bar Association Group's report, which calls for legislation to be enacted, should be for people who shouldn't medically have the vaccination as directed by their doctors, making a legally backed argument on pages 60 to 63 of a newly released report on the unique legal and ethical issues brought forward by the global pandemic. The health law section of the Bar Association writes that some Americans may push back on the COVID-19 vaccination for religious, philosophical, or personal reasons, but for the sake of public health, mandatory vaccinations for COVID-19 should be required in the United States as soon as it is available. Mandatory vaccinations are supported by the authority of the state police power when the vaccinations are necessary to protect the health of the community, the group writes in the report. While citing the 1905 U.S. Supreme Court decision in Jacobson v. Massachusetts, pointing to several constitutional law-focused cases, including the Supreme Court's 1990 decision in Cruzan v. Director, Missouri Department of Health, the group also says constitutional challenges under the Religious Freedom Clause under the First Amendment and under the Substantive Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment have failed when the individual interests are not strong enough to outweigh the public benefit. And this is ultimately the narrative that's been sold to the public throughout this crisis, that individual rights and freedoms are trumped by the majority in the interests of keeping everyone safe. One thing we can say with confidence is that all roads are leading us, whether we like it or not, to a not-so-distant future in which the vast majority of humanity will be expected to be vaccinated against this virus, and I would say potentially other viruses that the elites throw our way. Now, there are a lot of theories as to why this vaccine is so critical to their plans, and what the vaccine is, in fact, all about, and what its true function is. some of those theories may indeed have a great deal of merit. I've got a lot of thoughts about them myself. I would, of course, only be speculating at this point, but as time passes, I will do a more deep dive into some of those theories, because they are definitely worth exploring, and I have a great deal of concerns about what is going to be in the vaccine and what its true purpose is. I don't believe its true purpose is to keep us safe and healthy and protect against a virus that we already know there's treatments for, and that it's only as fatal to a very small percentage of the elderly or immune-compromised population. Effectively, it's no more fatal than a seasonal influenza, and recent studies have explained this. But just for this video, I wanted to make it clear that mandates are the order of the day under this disturbing new abnormal that we're now living through. Be sure to share this video, download it, and re-upload it where you like. Thanks very much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.